democracy, the greatest form of government man has ever created. Right? Nah, I'm Chad Garrett. Welcome to the Chad Garrett Show. We were talking last week about this Greek philosophical concept of anacyclosis. I'm going to recap what we talked about before we jump into where we are, and that is with democracy. Recap first. Anacyclosis, we translate now to meaning the cycle of regimes. It's this idea that society goes through this cycle of appointing a monarchy, and that corruption seeps in and turns it into a tyranny. That a few good men rise up and unseat the tyrant and get named the aristocracy, and they have their turn to lead. And then corruption seeks into them as well, and we get the oligarchy, in which case the people recognize and the people rise up to overthrow the oligarchs and form a democracy. And that's where we're at today, right? America's a democracy. This is the greatest form of government that's ever existed. There's no way. This is where the cycle stops. We've made it. We're here. No, sorry. That's probably the biggest lie that we're told growing up. First of all, that democracy is the greatest form of government. And second of all, that America is a democracy. So let's handle those one by one. Democracy is not the greatest form of government. As a matter of fact, ancient Athens proved this. Ancient Athens is touted as being this center of democracy where everyone gets to vote and everyone gets to have their ideals and talk about their philosophy and have these great works of art and architecture. And a lot of that is true, except for the democracy was reserved for the aristocrats. It was reserved for the upper class. There weren't a few appointed aristocrats, but those that found themselves in the upper class, a part of the bigger families, a part of the higher echelons of academia, those were the ones that got to vote. Women didn't get to vote. Boys that were too young didn't get to vote. Slaves absolutely did not get to vote. So this idea that Athens gets to tout around this idea of being this great democracy, we get our ideas from Athens, and the Roman Republic was fashioned after democratic ideas of the Greeks, but Athens itself, it wasn't all that altruistic. Though the Greeks loved their freedom and loved their laws, they were not perfect. So let's talk real fast about why we believe in this lie. Why do we believe in the lie that democracy is so amazing? Well, first and foremost, it's the most representative. Rather than appointing a few people to vote on your behalf, you get a direct say in the laws that are passed. If you go back to the Athenian idea of democracy, there are laws, there are things that are happening, you get to vote. Even Rome tried to build upon this to some extent. The issue with Rome was that you had to not only be a Roman citizen in order to vote and be a male, but you had to be in Rome the day of the election. Even some of the highest born families in Rome couldn't make such a trip as often as they had their elections. And so even that was just a front for power to be coveted by the ruling class. This idea that most of the altruistic ideals and principles that are put forth by those that are in power are actually just a cover-up of the true intentions of those that are seeking power. Democracy has been no different. And to believe in the lie that America as a democracy, as we're taught in school at a young age, I think is ridiculous. We are a democratic republic where we elect the officials that go into our higher echelons of legal station, our Senate, our House of Representatives, and our presidency. And then the president appoints our Supreme Court justices. And through these three forms of government, we have checks and balances that make one unified organism. But they're all elected by the people. So it's the people's choice. This is true. The people are supposed to elect these officials. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because the first thing I want to do before we talk about the Democratic Republic and the station of the American society, I want to talk a little bit about how democracy has a shelf life. It's not the best system. Just like the monarchy, as good as it can be, as amazing and effective as it can be, falls to corruption easily and becomes tyranny. As the aristocracy also falls to tyranny, or falls to corruption and becomes an oligarchy, democracy is incorruptible. Truly incorruptible. It's possible to corrupt one man in the monarchy. It's possible to corrupt many men in the aristocracy. It is impossible to corrupt everyone. It is. Even in Germany, there were people that didn't agree with the fascist regime and left. It is truly impossible to corrupt everyone. Thank God that he gave us moral compass in order to recognize these things and to have virtues and integrity and stand by our beliefs with courageous intent. But democracy has its own flaws that give it a shelf life. One of these is that it is the longest process to make decisions, because you have to wait for everyone to vote, and then after that, you have to wait for everyone to count the vote. And you're going to open the door for the most amount of broad disagreement. When you combine these two things over a long period of time, you sow the seeds for what people call anarchy. The complete disability for people to agree on something, and so their passions and their desires, their wants and needs erupt. Without leadership to guide, the democracy falls to anarchy and chaos ensues. And this is where anacyclosis comes back in. The democracy falls, anarchy ensues, and with the chaos and the anarchy, the people will look for leadership. And this leadership so often comes in the form of one good, charismatic, and often well-educated man who steps up and gets appointed most often by the people, captures the hearts of the people, and makes the monarchy occur again. And thus the cycle begins. Back to the beginning. The monarchy, the tyranny. The aristocracy, the oligarchy, the democracy, the anarchy, to the monarchy again. So where are we in the cycle today? It's actually extremely hard to say, because our founding fathers were geniuses, right? And they were very well educated in the ideas of both Roman and Greek culture. They were able to fashion a government that was made of all three. The people choose the aristocracy and the monarch. The monarch has a limited shelf life. We gave him 4 years. We gave him 4 years modeled after our first president. 4-year terms and 8 years total, which we totally modeled after George Washington. After George Washington had the virtue to turn down the crown. A lot of people don't know that. Our founding fathers were so well versed in the ways of the monarchy that their first inclination was to give George Washington the crown. You helped us claim our independence. You're a great man. We're going to give you the crown. Lead us just like you led us in battle, just like you led us in war, just like Julius Caesar, just like Alexander the Great. Lead us. Very seldom does history come down to the single decision of a single man. So often it is the choices of the many people and the large decisions that shape the course of history, but this point was pivotal. And who we are as a culture and as a country today would not be the same had one man not had the virtue to say no. I feel like my grandfather doing the pointing thing. Sorry, anecdote there. We got a little intense. I had to give you a laugh. Being so well versed in the monarchy and how well the monarchy works, the founding fathers wanted to capture that, but they wanted to capture it in a way that wouldn't leave ultimate power to a single individual. After Washington turned down the offer, of course. And so they fashioned a government of three parts. The democracy, where the people get to choose the aristocracy and the monarch. An aristocracy that has checks over the monarch. A monarch that gets to select people to help interpret the laws that are made by the aristocracy. And the checks that ensue by the monarchy on the aristocracy with veto power over the laws that they create. It's wonderful. It's a beautiful marriage of the Greek Athenian ideas, of the Roman Republic, and of the monarchies that ruled Europe. And so to get down to the nitty-gritty and to figure out where we are in this cycle, I have two theories. One of them is very simple and we'll get through very quickly. The other one is going to take a little bit of stretching of your mind. But before we get into those theories, I want to say thank you so much for tuning into this episode, the second part of our series on Anacyclosis, the cycle of regimes. If you are enjoying this content, please like the video, like the podcast, subscribe to the podcast and to the YouTube channel. Go and follow our Facebook pages at Forerunner Productions and at Chad W. Garrett. Leave us a 5-star review. You don't know how helpful it is that 5 minutes of your time to leave us a 5-star review and let us know what you're thinking about the podcast and the content, how much that helps us not only improve our content, but get our name out so that other people can benefit from these same messages. If you really like our content, please check us out on Patreon and think about supporting us financially at patreon.com/Forerunner. Now, you're not just helping support us financially for the free content that we give you like this episode, but you also get a ton of exclusive content as well as articles from some of our top creators, including myself with essays that I write, as well as early access to books that we have coming out through Forerunner Productions publications, my political hot takes, Chase Sizemore's upcoming EP, if you're a music person, as well as bloopers and other things. There's so much content that we have coming for you guys that we cannot list it all here. So if that's something that you're interested in, please, again, check us out. It's patreon.com/Forerunner. Again, that's patreon.com/Forerunner. Oh, it also gives you access to the mailbag, which we definitely need some people to go and do this thing so that we can have mailbag questions, because I want to answer questions at the end of episodes for you guys. I want to answer your questions and give you some spotlight on the show too. Back to the theories. Where do we reside in Anacyclosis, the cycle of regimes? Theory number 1. We are in the time of the aristocracy. What is my support for this? Okay. How is it that if the people choose our aristocratic tier, that we have career politicians? How is it that there are certain families that constantly find themselves in power in political realms? Part of me believes that the country is waking up to this oligarchical, this is a heck of a word, so you have to bear with me, oligarchical, right? It's such a tongue twister. Part of me believes that the country is waking up to the oligarchical control that the aristocracy now has. Think about the deep state that is coming into the spotlight with the Epstein case. Think about the Bush family and how many generations of the Bushes have been in political power and how many of them have been presidents. Think about the Clinton family and how prominent Bill Clinton has been as a president and a political figure, how prominent Hillary Clinton has been as a political figure, though she lost the presidency, how powerful the Clinton Foundation is and the corruption that comes behind that family and their relations to the Epstein. Think about the Romney family. How come it conservatives too? How come it Mitch McConnell, who has married the daughter of a high-ranking Chinese official, right? There are ties to all sorts of things that just make you go, The most recent form of these would be Joe Biden and Hunter Biden's involvement in Burisma out in Ukraine. If you don't know about any of these things, I'm not going to be the one to spoil them for you. We don't have enough time on this episode. Look them up. They are all quite interesting. Most of these things, though, you will have heard of unless you've been living under a rock. Some of you might have been. The rock sounds nice because a lot of this crap is crazy. If we are in the time of the aristocracy, I believe that we are on the cusp of the Democratic Reformation. Now, I hope that this Reformation comes as such a reforming of the system that takes us back to our constitutional roots. There is something indelibly beautiful and right and good about our Constitution. No other Constitution has lasted 200 years. And yet recently we have found ourselves pulling farther and farther away from it as a culture and as a society. I hope that this Reformation, should it come, should I be right, and we are in the time of the aristocracy, that the rise of the democratic people put more power into the Constitution and not deviate farther away from it. Theory number 2 is a wild ride. This one's going to ask you to stretch your brain a little bit. It stretched mine when I was coming up with it. But the more I thought about it, the more sense it made to me. And even if you have to listen to this a couple times, hopefully it will make sense to you too. Theory number 2 for me says that we are in the time of the monarchy. Now, before you get all bent out of shape, regardless of whether you agree or disagree, I'm not talking about the president. Let me say that again. I am not talking about the president. I did that for Chase's ears. Compared to Congress, and especially compared to the recent activities of the Supreme Court, the president actually has the least amount of power out of all of them. The reason why Congress gets all bent out of shape is because they have a hard time coming to a conclusion. Back to what I was saying with the aristocracy and it being difficult to get everybody on the same page. And the Supreme Court, let's just not even tackle that bear today. Rather, the presidency, the executive branch as a system, remains the only uncorrupted system in our government. At least so I believe. And that is because we have, for 46 presidents straight, we have seen a peaceful transfer of power as it was intended by the Constitution. Say what you want to about the people and their corruption and their abuses of power or lack thereof, depending on your political point of view. I don't care. The system itself has been uncorrupted. So, if I'm not talking about the presidency, what am I talking about? I am actually speaking of the idea that our system of government has become a monarch, has become monarchical. Well, how does that work? Okay, let me break this down. The easiest way to do this is to think of the system of government as a living organism. This living organism has three pieces. It has three main organs to it, right? Those three main organs keep each other in check, and they also help each other function. So you have the executive branch, the judiciary, and the legislative. President, Supreme Court, Congress. Okay, Congress is the House and the Senate for anyone that's having trouble keeping track. Okay. These three organs make up one organism that is our system of government, our democratic republic. In this theory, that democratic republic has become corrupted by a virus, say, if we're going to stick with the idea of it being a living organism. It has contracted a virus to where now the system itself that was designed to have the powers of a monarch, right? It was designed to be able to rule, but to have checks and balances within itself so that when it created these laws and enforced these laws, it did so as one unified unit. The idea says that that system of government, that organism, is now the monarchy. Makes a lot of sense when you think about if that is how the founding fathers, and I believe that is how the founding fathers intended for our government to function, to have all the powers of the monarch and to be able to check itself before it began to issue its ruling principles. I believe that it's not too far-fetched. And if this is true, that means that the government has operated how the founding fathers wanted it to in many ways. Though we have failed to live up to the standard placed forth in our Declaration of Independence because of the nature of our Constitution and the amendment nature of it, we have been able to progressively get closer due to the characteristics and the beliefs of good men towards a more unified and perfect existence. But if the government itself has contracted this virus and become tyrannical, who then is the aristocracy? Who are the few good men that will rise up and take on the tyrannical system? This idea scares the ever-living out of me. I do not want anyone to think that I am advocating for a complete overthrow of government. I am not. I love our Constitution. I think that our founding fathers were geniuses. But if I'm right about this theory, that means that the aristocracy is occupied by, my best guess, big tech. And that is terrifying because we already know that corruption exists within big tech. And so what happens if big tech is the power that unseats the tyrannical monarchy? And they're already corrupted, do we go straight into a period of oligarchy again? How terrifying is that? What happens? Do the people immediately have to rise up and try and overthrow big tech? What does that look like? Do we even have a chance? Or does that corrupted aristocracy, does that oligarchy crush us underfoot as oligarchies are so known to do? Do we become forced to make a choice as to live in another corrupted system, going from one corrupted system to another corrupted system and live in that corrupted system? Or do we rise up? We can't go anywhere. We can't do what the Pilgrims did. We can't do what the founding fathers did and try and go to a new place. You can't, there's nowhere left to go. We've explored the earth, and we don't have the technology to become domesticated under the oceans. Where do we go? SpaceX is doing a great job exploring a new frontier, but we're not there yet. That's not a viable option yet. The only choice at that point is revolution. And that is terrifying. To have lived in a country that has done so much good, and due to the cycle of regimes and the corruption that pre-exists in the aristocracy, should this be a time of monarchy, go from one corrupted government to another. Now, all of this seems a tad bit morbid, so let me shine a ray of hope on the subject. Anacyclosis is a model, a good model, one that we see history abide by time and time again. But often history also goes out of order. And history often curves towards justice and good and the right and courageous things. I do not believe that our Constitution is going anywhere. I believe that we are daily becoming closer to living by the principles that were laid out in the Declaration of Independence. And I think that just because the model helps us predict how history rhymes with itself rather than repeats, it rhymes with itself, that there is hope that once again history will curve towards the just, and we will be better off for however the pieces fall. After all, we live in the greatest country and the greatest society that the world and history has ever seen. I'm Chad Garrett. This is the Chad Garrett Show. As we come to the end of the Cycle of Regimes series, I wanted to give a huge shout out and thank you to Spencer Clavin, host of the Young Heretics podcast. You really inspired me to do this particular series, and you really inspired a lot of the research that came out of that has really broadened my horizons and my view of both Greek and Roman culture. Thank you so much for making the podcast that you make and for the reasons that you're making it. And I hope that one day I get to sit down and share a cigar and maybe a finger or two of whiskey with you and have a nice long conversation. Thanks again, man.